was just a poor girl from a forgotten village, mocked, beaten, and left to survive alone. But everything changes the moment a mysterious knight saves her in the forest and uncovers a secret that could shake the kingdom to its core. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The dawn broke cold and unforgiving over the village of Ashwick, a small settlement nestled in the rolling hills of medieval England. Frost clung to the thatched roofs like silver cobwebs, and the morning air carried the sharp bite of winter that seemed to seep into every bone and sinew. In a modest dwelling on the outskirts of the village, a young woman stirred from her thin bed of straw, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Eleanor rose before the sun had fully claimed the sky, as she did every morning. Her long auburn hair fell in waves around her shoulders, catching what little light filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls. Despite the harsh conditions of her life, there was an undeniable beauty about her that no amount of dirt or exhaustion could diminish. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, like emeralds set in porcelain, and her features held a delicate refinement that seemed oddly out of place in the rough surroundings of peasant life. She wrapped herself in a threadbare woolen cloak, its edges frayed from years of use, and stepped outside into the biting cold. The village was beginning to wake, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared their meager morning meals. Eleanor had no such luxury. She lived alone in the small cottage that had belonged to the woman who raised her, old Martha, who had passed away 3 winters ago, leaving Eleanor truly alone in the world. As she made her way toward the well in the village center, Eleanor could feel the familiar weight of hostile stares upon her. The other villagers had never accepted her, not truly. There was something about her that set her apart, something they couldn't quite name but instinctively mistrusted. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself with an unconscious grace, or the refinement of her features that seemed to mock their weathered faces. Whatever the reason, they had made her life a daily trial of humiliation and cruelty. "Well, if it isn't the bastard girl," came a harsh voice from behind her. Eleanor didn't need to turn to know it was Greta, the butcher's wife, a woman whose cruelty was matched only by her ugliness of spirit. Come to steal water from honest folk again? Eleanor kept her eyes down, her jaw clenched. "I pay my share to the village, same as everyone," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger beneath it. Greta laughed, a sound like metal scraping stone. "Your share? What share? You're nothing but a burden on this village, girl, a foundling with no name and no future. Old Martha should have left you in the woods to die when she found you all those years ago." Other villagers had begun to gather, drawn by the promise of morning entertainment at Eleanor's expense. She could see them from the corner of her eye, their faces eager and cruel. This was how most days began for her, with some variation of the same ritual humiliation. "Leave her be, Greta," a young voice called out, though it lacked conviction. It was Simon, the miller's son, a boy of barely 15 summers, who occasionally showed Eleanor small kindnesses when his friends weren't watching. "Mind your tongue, boy," Greta snapped, "or I'll tell your father you've been making eyes at this worthless creature." Eleanor filled her bucket quickly, the icy water sloshing against the sides. She wanted nothing more than to escape back to her cottage, but she had work to do. She had secured employment at the manor house on the hill, the grand estate of Lord Godwin, who ruled over Ashwick and the surrounding lands. It was backbreaking work in the kitchens and laundry, but it provided her with enough coin to survive. Barely. The walk to the manor took nearly an hour on foot, following a winding path that climbed steadily upward through bare winter fields. Eleanor's worn leather boots, more patches than original material, crunched through the frost-covered grass. As she walked, she allowed herself to drift into thoughts, a dangerous habit but one she couldn't entirely suppress. She often wondered about her origins. Old Martha had told her, in those final delirious days before death claimed her, that she had found Eleanor as an infant, wrapped in cloth far too fine for any peasant child, left at the edge of the forest on a night when the wind howled like a living thing. Martha had never discovered who left her there or why, but she had raised Eleanor as her own, teaching her to work hard, to keep her head down, and to accept her place in the world. But Eleanor had never quite managed that last part. Deep within her, in a place she barely acknowledged even to herself, there burned a small flame of defiance, a whisper that said she was meant for something more than this life of endless toil and casual cruelty. She squashed these thoughts whenever they arose, knowing they were foolish and dangerous. but they persisted nonetheless, like weeds growing through stone. The manor house loomed before her, a massive structure of gray stone with towers that reached toward the heavy clouds. It was ancient, built generations ago when the first lords claimed these lands, and it exuded an air of permanence and power that made Eleanor feel even smaller than usual. She entered through the servants' door at the rear, immediately engulfed in the warmth and chaos of the kitchen. "You're late," barked Mildred, the head cook, a formidable woman with arms like ham hocks and a perpetual scowl. "The Lady Beatrice has guests arriving today, nobility from the capital. Everything must be perfect, and I'll not have your laziness ruining our preparations." Eleanor bit back the retort that she was not late, that she had arrived at precisely the same time as always. There was no point in arguing with Mildred, who would find fault with her regardless of what she did. Instead, she simply nodded and moved to her station, where an enormous pile of vegetables awaited her attention. The kitchen was a world unto itself, a hot and frantic place where dozens of servants worked in carefully orchestrated chaos. The smell of roasting meat mingled with fresh bread and herbs, creating an aroma that made Eleanor's empty stomach clench with hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, a piece of hard bread that had been her entire meal. As she worked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the pile of turnips and carrots, she became aware of an unusual commotion in the manor. She could hear raised voices from the floors above, the sound of many footsteps, the clatter of horses in the courtyard. The guests were arriving earlier than expected. "Eleanor," Mildred's voice cut through the kitchen noise, "stop your dawdling and take this firewood up to the great hall. The hearth needs feeding, and the regular boy has gone missing. Useless creature that he is." Eleanor wiped her hands on her rough linen apron and gathered the heavy bundle of split logs. The great hall was not a place servants like her typically entered, especially not when the lord and his guests were present, but she had no choice but to obey. She made her way through the narrow servants' passages, the wood heavy in her arms, until she emerged into the vast space of the great hall. The sight took her breath away. She had only been in this room a handful of times, and never when it was prepared for important guests. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of hunting and battle in vibrant colors. The long tables were covered with fine linen, and silver plate gleamed in the light of dozens of candles. At the far end of the hall, Lord Godwin sat in his ornate chair, deep in conversation with a man Eleanor had never seen before. This stranger commanded attention simply by existing. He was tall, powerfully built, with broad shoulders that strained against the fine wool of his deep blue tunic. His face was striking, with strong features and intense dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His hair was black as a raven's wing, worn slightly longer than was fashionable, and his jaw was dark with stubble. He wore a sword at his hip with the ease of a man who knew how to use it, and his bearing spoke of authority and strength. Everything about him radiated power and confidence. Eleanor tried to move quietly toward the hearth, hoping to complete her task unnoticed, but her worn boot caught on the edge of a rug, and she stumbled. The firewood clattered from her arms, scattering across the polished stone floor, with a tremendous noise that echoed through the hall. Silence fell like a hammer. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Eleanor's face burned with humiliation as she dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the scattered logs, her hands shaking. "Clumsy wretch!" Lord Godwin's voice boomed across the hall. He was a heavy man with a florid face and small, cruel eyes. "Can you do nothing right? You've disrupted my meeting with your incompetence." "I apologize, my lord," Eleanor whispered, not daring to look up. "Please forgive me." "Forgive you? You're fortunate I don't have you whipped for such disrespect. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind." Eleanor gathered the wood as quickly as her trembling hands would allow, acutely aware of the contemptuous stares fixed upon her. As she turned to flee, her eyes inadvertently met those of the stranger. For a brief moment, something flickered in his dark gaze, something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the contempt she was used to seeing, nor was it pity. It was something else entirely, something that made her heart beat faster in her chest. Then the moment passed and she hurried from the hall, her cheeks still burning with shame. She could hear Lord Godwin's voice behind her, apologizing to his guest for the interruption, for the incompetence of the servants, for having to witness such a disgraceful display. Back in the safety of the kitchen, Eleanor leaned against the cold stone wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were still shaking, not just from the humiliation but from something else, something she couldn't name. The image of the stranger's face remained fixed in her mind, those dark eyes that had looked at her not with contempt, but with something that might have been curiosity. "Stupid girl," Mildred muttered, though her tone was slightly less harsh than usual. "You need to be more careful. Lord Godwin's in a foul mood today, and he'll take any excuse to make an example of someone. Now get back to your work, and try not to cause any more disasters." Eleanor returned to her vegetables, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself wondering about the stranger, about who he was and why he was visiting Lord Godwin. He had the bearing of a warrior, that much was clear, and his fine clothes suggested noble birth. Perhaps he was a knight, or even a lord himself, though from where she couldn't guess. The day wore on in its usual pattern of endless work. Eleanor's arms ached from scrubbing, her back hurt from bending, and her feet throbbed in her inadequate boots. But she endured, as she always did, because there was no other choice. When evening finally came and the servants were dismissed, she wrapped herself in her thin cloak and began the long walk back to her cottage. The winter night had fallen completely, and the temperature had dropped even further. Eleanor's breath came in white puffs as she hurried along the dark path, eager to reach the meager warmth of her small hearth. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the journey treacherous, and she had to feel her way carefully along the familiar route. She was perhaps halfway home when she heard the sound of horses approaching from behind. Eleanor quickly stepped off the path, pressing herself against a large oak tree. Travelers on the road at night could be dangerous, and she had no wish to encounter anyone, friendly or otherwise. But the riders had seen her. They slowed their horses, and Eleanor's heart began to pound with fear as she recognized the colors they wore. These were Lord Godwin's men, and they had stopped deliberately. "Well, well," said a voice she recognized with a sinking feeling. It was Marcus, the Lord's eldest son, a young man known throughout the village for his cruelty and his wandering hands. "If it isn't the bastard girl from the kitchen, what are you doing out here all alone, Eleanor? Don't you know the night is dangerous for a woman with no protection?" He dismounted, and his two companions did the same. They were all young men of noble birth, pampered and arrogant, who viewed peasant girls as little more than playthings. Eleanor had avoided Marcus's attention thus far, but her luck, it seemed, had run out. "I'm simply going home, my lord," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "I mean no trouble. Please let me pass." Marcus laughed, stepping closer. Even in the darkness, she could smell the wine on his breath. "Let you pass? But we've only just met. Surely you can spare a moment to entertain your betters. Come now, don't be shy." He reached for her, and Eleanor did the only thing she could. She ran. Eleanor's feet pounded against the frozen earth as she fled into the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at her throat. Behind her, she could hear Marcus and his companions laughing, the sound echoing through the winter night like the baying of hounds on the hunt. They were toying with her, she realized, with growing terror. They could have caught her easily on horseback, but they were drawing out the chase, savoring her fear. Her worn boots slipped on patches of ice, and branches whipped at her face as she veered off the main path into the woods. The darkness was absolute beneath the canopy of bare trees, and Eleanor could barely see where she was going. She only knew she had to keep running, had to put distance between herself and the men who pursued her with such casual malice. "Come back, little rabbit," Marcus's voice called out, slurred with drink but still carrying clearly through the cold air. "You're only making this more entertaining for us. We'll catch you eventually, and when we do, you'll wish you'd been more cooperative." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, and her legs were beginning to tremble from exertion and fear. She knew these woods well from years of gathering firewood and herbs, but in the darkness, every familiar landmark was hidden, and she found herself stumbling blindly forward, driven only by pure instinct and terror. Suddenly, her foot caught on an exposed root, and she went sprawling forward onto the frozen ground. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment she lay stunned, gasping like a fish pulled from water. She could hear the men crashing through the undergrowth behind her, getting closer with each passing second. With a desperate effort, Eleanor pushed herself to her hands and knees, preparing to rise and continue her flight. But before she could stand, a strong hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. She found herself staring up into Marcus's face, twisted with cruel amusement and something darker, something that made her blood run cold. "Caught you," he said, his breath reeking of wine. "Now, let's see if you're as pretty as you think you are under all that dirt and those rags." His companions had caught up, forming a circle around them. Eleanor could see their faces in the dim moonlight that filtered through the clouds, and what she saw there offered no hope. These were men who had never been denied anything in their lives, who viewed the people beneath them as objects to be used and discarded at their whim. "Please," Eleanor whispered, hating the pleading tone in her voice but unable to suppress it. "Please, I've done nothing to harm you. Just let me go home." Marcus laughed again, reaching down to grab her arm and haul her roughly to her feet. "Done nothing? You exist, don't you? That's offense enough. You walk around the village with your nose in the air, as if you're better than your betters. It's time someone taught you your proper place in this world." Eleanor tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. She opened her mouth to scream, though she knew no help would come, that even if someone heard her, no one would dare interfere with a nobleman's sport. But before she could make a sound, a new voice cut through the night, deep and commanding, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Release her. Now." Everyone froze. Eleanor's eyes darted past Marcus to see a figure on horseback emerging from the shadows between the trees. Even in the darkness, she recognized him immediately. It was the stranger from the manor, the tall, powerfully built man with the intense dark eyes. He sat astride a massive black stallion, and though he was alone, his presence seemed to fill the entire forest. Marcus's hand tightened on Eleanor's arm, but she could feel a tremor of uncertainty run through him. "This is none of your concern, stranger. This girl is from my father's lands. I can do with her as I please." The man dismounted with fluid grace, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. As he stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, Eleanor could see his face clearly. His expression was cold, harder than stone, and his dark eyes held a dangerous glint that made even Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "I am Sir William Garrett, Knight of the Realm and personal guard to His Majesty King Edward," the stranger said, his voice carrying quiet menace. "And I say again, release the girl. This is not a request." The title sent a shock through the assembled men. A knight of the royal guard was not someone to be trifled with, even by the son of a lord. Marcus's companions were already backing away, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. But Marcus, drunk and foolish, hesitated. "My father is Lord Godwin. These are his lands. You have no authority here." Sir William's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "Your father serves at the pleasure of the king, as do all lords of this realm, and the king's law is clear about men who prey upon defenseless women. Now, for the last time, release her, or I will be forced to teach you a lesson in proper conduct that you will not soon forget." For a long moment, Marcus seemed to waver between drunken pride and self-preservation. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he shoved Eleanor away from him with such force that she stumbled and nearly fell again. Sir William moved with startling speed, catching her arm and steadying her before she could hit the ground. "Get out of my sight," William said to Marcus and his companions, his voice low and dangerous. "And pray I don't mention this incident to your father or to the king. Trust me when I say that neither conversation would end well for you." Marcus's face twisted with impotent rage, but he had enough sense left to recognize defeat. "This isn't over," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "My father will hear about this interference." "By all means tell him," William replied calmly. "I'm certain he'll be delighted to learn that his son and heir spends his evenings terrorizing young women in the forest. I'm sure it will fill him with tremendous pride." Marcus and his companions mounted their horses and rode away, their retreat lacking any dignity. Eleanor stood trembling, acutely aware that she was now alone in the dark forest with a man she didn't know, a man who, despite having just saved her, was still a stranger and a member of the nobility who could do with her as he wished. But when William turned to look at her, his expression had softened considerably. The cold menace was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now. Eleanor shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Her entire body was shaking, whether from cold, fear, or the aftermath of terror. She couldn't say. She was acutely conscious of how she must look to him, with her threadbare cloak, her dirty face, her wild hair escaping from its braid. William removed his own cloak, a magnificent garment of thick wool lined with fur, and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, and Eleanor couldn't help but pull it closer around herself, despite knowing she shouldn't accept such a gift from a nobleman. "Thank you, my lord," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved me from... I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." "I think we both know what would have happened," William said grimly, "and you need not thank me for doing what any decent man should do. Those cowards prey on the vulnerable because they're too weak to face anyone who might fight back." He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. "What's your name?" "Eleanor, my lord. Just Eleanor. I have no family name." Something flickered in his eyes at that, though Eleanor couldn't identify what it was. "Well, just Eleanor. It's not safe for you to walk alone at night, especially not after what just happened. Those fools might return, emboldened by drink and wounded pride. Allow me to escort you home." Eleanor knew she should refuse, that being seen with a nobleman would only bring her more trouble from the villagers, but she was too shaken to face the walk alone. She nodded, and William led his horse by the reins as they began walking back toward the village. He matched his pace to hers, and they walked in silence for several minutes. Finally, Eleanor worked up the courage to speak. "May I ask, my lord, why were you in the forest? It seemed fortunate timing that you came upon us when you did." William glanced at her, and she thought she detected the hint of a smile. "I couldn't sleep. The manor house is comfortable enough, but I've spent too many years campaigning to rest easy in soft beds and quiet rooms. I often ride at night when sleep eludes me. Tonight I heard shouting and decided to investigate. I'm glad I did." "You said you serve King Edward," Eleanor ventured, her curiosity overcoming her usual caution. "Is that why you're visiting Lord Godwin?" "In part. The king has business with all his lords, ensuring their loyalty and checking on the state of their lands. Lord Godwin's territory sits on an important border, and His Majesty wants to ensure it's properly defended." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I also have personal business in this region, though that's a more complicated matter." Eleanor wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't dare press further. They had reached the outskirts of the village, and she could see her small cottage ahead. She stopped, suddenly reluctant to let him see the full extent of her poverty. "This is close enough, my lord. My home is just ahead. Thank you again for your kindness. I'll return your cloak tomorrow when I come to work at the manor." But William was looking past her at the cottage, his expression thoughtful. "You live alone?" "Yes, my lord. The woman who raised me passed away some years ago." "And you have no family? No one to protect you?" Eleanor shook her head, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness that she usually kept buried deep inside. "No one, my lord. I'm alone in the world." William was silent for a long moment, and Eleanor couldn't read his expression in the darkness. Finally he spoke, and his voice was gentle. "No one should be alone in this world, Eleanor, and no one should have to endure what you faced tonight." He hesitated, then continued. "I meant what I said to those fools. The king's law protects all his subjects, high and low. If anyone troubles you again, you have my word that I will see justice done." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them back. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such kindness, had offered her protection without expecting something in return. "You're very kind, my lord, but I'm nobody. Just a foundling with no name and no future. As I've been reminded many times, why would you concern yourself with my troubles?" William reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she was forced to meet his eyes. His touch was warm despite the cold night, and Eleanor felt something stir in her chest, something she had never felt before. "You're not nobody, Eleanor. Every person has worth, regardless of their birth or station. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He released her and stepped back, and Eleanor felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. "Keep the cloak tonight. You'll catch your death in that thin garment you're wearing. Return it when you can, or keep it if you need it. I have others." Before Eleanor could protest, he had mounted his horse and was riding away, leaving her standing in the cold night, wrapped in a nobleman's cloak, her mind whirling with questions and emotions she couldn't begin to name. She watched until he disappeared into the darkness, then turned and hurried to her cottage. Inside, she lit her small fire and sat before it, William's cloak still wrapped around her shoulders. The fabric was finer than anything she had ever touched, and it carried a scent that she couldn't identify. something masculine and clean, with hints of leather and steel. She knew she should set it aside, should prepare for bed and try to sleep, but instead, she found herself pulling it closer, reliving every moment of their encounter. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with the contempt she was used to seeing, or with the predatory interest that Marcus had shown, but with something else. Respect, perhaps, curiosity, and something more, something that made her heart race when she remembered it. Eleanor knew she was being foolish. Sir William Garrett was a knight of the Royal Guard, a man of noble birth and high station. She was a nameless peasant girl, a foundling with nothing to offer and no future to speak of. There could never be anything between them, and even thinking about him in such terms was dangerous folly. But as she finally lay down to sleep, still wrapped in his cloak, she couldn't help but let her mind wander. She thought about his strong features, his powerful build, the way he had faced down 3 men without a moment's hesitation to protect her. She thought about the gentleness in his voice when he had told her she wasn't nobody, about the warmth of his touch when he had tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams. Dreams of dark eyes and strong hands, of a voice that spoke to her with kindness and respect, of a man who saw her not as a worthless foundling, but as someone worthy of protection and care. They were dangerous dreams, foolish dreams, but Eleanor allowed herself to indulge in them just this once, knowing that the harsh light of morning would bring reality crashing back. The morning came too quickly, as it always did. Eleanor woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the cracks in her cottage walls, and for a moment she thought the previous night had been a dream. But then she felt the weight of the fine woolen cloak still wrapped around her, and she knew it had been real. Sir William Garrett had saved her from Marcus and his companions. He had spoken to her with kindness. He had given her his cloak without expecting anything in return. Eleanor sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. She carefully folded the cloak, running her fingers over the soft fabric one last time before setting it aside. She would return it to him today when she went to work at the manor. The thought of seeing him again made her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Though she tried to suppress the feeling, nothing could come of it. Nothing should come of it. She dressed quickly in her usual rough clothing, a simple woolen dress that had been patched so many times it was difficult to tell what the original fabric had been. She tied her long auburn hair back in a practical braid and wrapped herself in her own thin cloak. The contrast to William's fine garment was stark, and it reminded her forcefully of the vast gulf that separated their stations in life. The walk to the manor was cold and miserable, as usual. Eleanor kept the fine cloak hidden in a cloth bundle under her arm, not wanting to draw attention from any villagers who might see her on the road. The last thing she needed was more gossip about her, more reasons for people to treat her with suspicion and contempt. When she arrived at the manor, the servants' entrance was already bustling with activity. Eleanor slipped inside and made her way to the kitchen, where Mildred was already barking orders at the morning staff. The head cook's eyes narrowed when she saw Eleanor. "You're late again," Mildred said sharply, though Eleanor knew she wasn't. "And Lord Godwin wants to see you in the great hall immediately. Don't ask me why, just go. And try not to embarrass us all again with your clumsiness." Eleanor's heart sank. Being summoned by Lord Godwin could mean nothing good, especially after what had happened with Marcus the previous night. She clutched the bundle containing William's cloak more tightly and made her way through the corridors toward the great hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. The great hall was less crowded than it had been the day before, but Lord Godwin was there, seated in his ornate chair with a goblet of wine already in his hand despite the early hour. Marcus stood beside him, his face sullen and bruised. Eleanor's breath caught when she saw Sir William standing off to one side, his expression unreadable. "Ah, the girl arrives," Lord Godwin said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "Eleanor, isn't it? My son has told me an interesting tale about events that transpired last night. He claims you accused him of improper conduct, that you ran from him when he was merely trying to offer you safe escort home." Eleanor's mind raced. So Marcus had twisted the story, making himself the victim. She should have expected nothing less. She kept her eyes lowered, knowing that contradicting a nobleman's son would be futile and dangerous. "Well?" Lord Godwin demanded. "What do you have to say for yourself? Did you or did you not make false accusations against my son?" Before Eleanor could formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse, William's voice cut through the tension in the room. "That's not what happened, Lord Godwin, and you know it." The Lord's face reddened. You dare to call my son a liar? I dare to speak the truth, William replied calmly, though Eleanor could hear steel beneath his words. I witnessed the entire incident. Your son and his companions pursued this girl through the forest with clear intent to harm her. When I intervened, your son attempted to assert authority. He doesn't possess over a knight of the King's Guard. If anyone has been dishonest about last night's events, it isn't the girl. Lord Godwin's knuckles whitened around his goblet. Those are serious accusations, Sir William. They are facts, not accusations. And if you wish to dispute them, I suggest you take the matter up with King Edward himself. I'm certain His Majesty would be most interested to hear how the sons of his lords conduct themselves when they believe no one of consequence is watching. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor could see the conflict playing out on Lord Godwin's florid face. He wanted to defend his son, to punish her for causing trouble, but he couldn't afford to antagonize a knight of the Royal Guard, especially not one who served the king directly. Finally, Lord Godwin waved his hand dismissively. Very well, the matter is settled. Eleanor, return to your duties. Marcus, I will speak with you privately. His eyes fixed on his son with unmistakable anger. It seems we need to discuss your behavior and the consequences of bringing shame upon our house. Eleanor curtsied quickly and turned to leave, but William's voice stopped her. A moment, if you please. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the bundle and approached him, acutely aware of every eye in the room upon her. She held out the cloak, unable to meet his gaze. Thank you for lending this to me, my lord. It kept me warm through the night. William took the cloak, but his fingers brushed against hers as he did, sending a jolt through her entire body. You're most welcome, Eleanor. I'm glad it served you well. He paused, then added, Lord Godwin, I require a personal servant during my stay here. Someone to attend to my chambers and see to my needs. I would like to request Eleanor for this duty. Eleanor's head snapped up in shock. Lord Godwin's expression was one of barely concealed fury, but he was trapped. To refuse such a reasonable request from an honored guest would be a grave insult. Of course, the Lord said through gritted teeth. Eleanor, you will attend to Sir William during his stay. See that you perform your duties adequately, or there will be consequences. Eleanor found herself dismissed along with William, following him through the corridors of the manor in a daze. She had no idea why he had requested her specifically, but she knew it would cause her nothing but trouble with the other servants and with Lord Godwin's family. When they were finally alone in a quiet hallway, she worked up the courage to speak. My lord, why did you do that? You've made things more difficult for me. William turned to face her, and she was struck again by the intensity of his dark eyes. On the contrary, I've made things safer for you. As my personal servant, you'll be under my direct protection. Marcus and his friends won't dare trouble you again, and Lord Godwin will think twice before allowing any harm to come to you while you're in my service. But when you leave, Eleanor began, then trailed off. She didn't want to think about what would happen when William eventually departed. When I leave, we'll address that situation then, William said firmly. For now, you're safe, and that's what matters. He gestured toward a door. These are my chambers. Your duties will be simple enough. Keep the rooms clean, see that the fire is maintained, bring my meals when I request them, and attend to any other reasonable needs I might have. Eleanor nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. Being in such close proximity to William felt dangerous in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Yes, my lord. I'll do my best to serve you well. I have no doubt of that, William said, and there was something in his tone that made Eleanor's cheeks flush. Now I have meetings to attend with Lord Godwin regarding the king's business. You may begin by tidying the chambers and ensuring fresh water is available for washing. I'll return later this afternoon. After William left, Eleanor entered his chambers with trepidation. The rooms were spacious and well-appointed, far nicer than anything she had ever seen up close. There was a large bed with thick furs and fine linens, a writing desk with parchment and ink, a chest for clothing, and a hearth that provided ample warmth. The contrast to her own miserable cottage was almost painful. She set about her work, cleaning and organizing with practiced efficiency. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice small details about William. His belongings were well maintained, but not ostentatious. There were books on the desk, which surprised her, as many knights she had heard of were barely literate. There was a beautifully crafted sword and armor, kept in perfect condition, speaking to his skill and discipline as a warrior. But what caught her attention most was a small leather pouch on the desk, partially open. Inside, she could see what appeared to be a miniature portrait. Curiosity overcame her better judgment, and she carefully extracted it. The portrait showed a beautiful woman with delicate features and auburn hair, holding an infant. The woman's eyes were kind, and she wore the clothing of nobility. "That was my mother," William's voice said from the doorway, making Eleanor jump. She hadn't heard him return. "She died when I was very young. That portrait is one of the few things I have to remember her by." Eleanor's face burned with shame at being caught snooping. "My lord, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have touched your personal belongings. Please forgive me." But William didn't seem angry. He crossed the room and took the portrait from her trembling hands, gazing at it with an expression of deep sadness. Her name was Catherine. She was kind and gentle, everything a mother should be. She died bringing my younger sister into the world, and my sister died with her. My father never recovered from the loss. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, genuinely moved by the pain in his voice. To lose so much at once must have been unbearable. William was silent for a long moment, still looking at the portrait. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost as if he were talking to himself. "My father told me before he died that the worst pain in life is not knowing, not having answers. He spent years wondering if he could have done something differently, if there was some way he could have saved them both." He carefully returned the portrait to its pouch, then turned to face Eleanor. "You said you're a foundling, that you know nothing of your birth or your family. Doesn't that pain you, not knowing where you came from or who you really are?" The question struck deeper than Eleanor expected. She had spent so many years pushing those thoughts away, telling herself it didn't matter, that she needed to focus on survival rather than unanswerable questions. But hearing William speak of his own loss, she felt something crack inside her. "Every day," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "every day I wonder who I am, where I came from, why I was left in the forest to die. Old Martha said I was wrapped in fine cloth when she found me, cloth that no peasant could afford. She said there was a piece of embroidery on the blanket, but she lost it years ago. Sometimes I think about what it might have meant, who might have put it there." William stepped closer, and Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze. "What if I told you that I might be able to help you find those answers, that I have resources and connections that could investigate your origins?" Hope flared in Eleanor's chest, painful and desperate. "Why would you do that for me? I'm nobody, just a servant girl. What could my origins possibly matter to you?" "Because," William said slowly, "I have reason to believe that your story might be connected to something larger, something that could be important not just to you, but to the entire kingdom." He hesitated, then continued. 20 years ago, King Edward's youngest daughter disappeared. She was an infant, stolen from the royal nursery by someone who was never caught. The king has searched for her ever since, but no trace was ever found. Most people assume she's dead. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "What does that have to do with me?" "Perhaps nothing," William admitted. "But the timing is right. You were found as an infant 20 years ago, wrapped in fine cloth. The king's daughter would be exactly your age now." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "And there's something about you, Eleanor. The way you carry yourself, the refinement of your features, even the color of your hair. It's familiar." Eleanor shook her head, backing away. "No, you're mistaken. I can't be. That's impossible. I'm a peasant girl, a nobody. The king's daughter would have been found if she were alive. This is madness." "Perhaps," William agreed. "But what if it's not? What if you are who I think you might be? Don't you want to know the truth?" Eleanor's mind was reeling. The idea was too enormous, too impossible to even contemplate. And yet, some part of her, the part that had always felt out of place in the world, that had always sensed she was meant for something more, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it could be true. "How would we even find out?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It's been 20 years. Any evidence would be long gone." "Not necessarily," William said. "The king's daughter had a birthmark, a small rose-shaped mark on her left shoulder. If you have such a mark, it would be strong evidence." Eleanor's hand flew to her left shoulder, where, beneath her rough dress, she knew there was indeed a small mark that old Martha had always said looked like a rose. She had never thought anything of it, just another meaningless detail of her existence. But now, "I have a mark," she whispered, "on my left shoulder. Martha always said it looked like a flower." The expression that crossed William's face was one of such intensity that Eleanor took another step back. "Show me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor hesitated, her hands trembling as they moved to the laces of her dress. This was improper, wrong in so many ways, but the need to know, to have answers after so many years of questions, overwhelmed her sense of propriety. She loosened the laces just enough to pull the fabric down from her left shoulder, revealing the small, rose-shaped birthmark. William stared at it for a long moment, and Eleanor could see his hands clenching at his sides, as if he were restraining himself from reaching out. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "It's true. Dear God, it's actually true. You're the king's daughter. You're Princess Eleanor, lost heir to the throne of England." Eleanor's hands shook as she pulled her dress back into place, her mind unable to process what William had just said. Princess Eleanor, the king's daughter, lost heir to the throne. The words seemed to bounce around inside her skull without finding purchase, too enormous and impossible to grasp. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "No, this can't be right. You're mistaken. The birthmark is just a coincidence. Lots of people must have birthmarks that look like flowers. It doesn't mean anything." William reached out and gently took her shoulders, steadying her. His touch was warm and firm, grounding her in the moment even as her world spun out of control. "Eleanor, listen to me. I know this is overwhelming. I know it seems impossible, but think about it. The timing, the fine cloth you were wrapped in, the birthmark, even your appearance. King Edward's late wife, Queen Anne, had auburn hair and green eyes, just like yours. The resemblance is unmistakable once you know to look for it." Eleanor pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself, as if she could hold the pieces of her fragmenting reality together through sheer force of will. "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why would someone steal the king's daughter and leave her in the forest to die? What possible reason could there be?" "That's what we need to find out," William said grimly. 20 years ago, there was considerable unrest in the kingdom. King Edward had enemies, nobles who believed they had a better claim to the throne, factions that wanted to see his line ended. The disappearance of his youngest daughter was devastating to him and to Queen Anne. Some say the queen never recovered from the loss. That grief weakened her until illness finally claimed her 5 years later. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, though she hadn't realized she was crying. "I killed the queen? My mother died because of me." "No," William said fiercely, crossing back to her and tilting her chin up so she was forced to meet his eyes. "You didn't kill anyone. You were an innocent infant, a victim of whoever orchestrated your abduction. The guilt lies with them, not with you, never with you." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but the weight of what she was learning felt crushing. "Does the king know that you found me?" "Not yet," William admitted. "I needed to be certain before I sent word. But now that I've seen the birthmark, there's no doubt in my mind. You are his daughter, Eleanor. You are Princess Eleanor of England." The title sounded foreign and wrong attached to her name. Eleanor, the peasant girl. Eleanor, the foundling. Eleanor, who scrubbed floors and chopped vegetables and endured daily humiliation from people who saw her as less than nothing. How could she possibly be a princess? "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. "Do you take me to the king? Present me at court like some prize you've won?" William's expression softened. "I will do nothing without your consent, Eleanor. This is your life, your choice. But I think you deserve to know the truth about who you are, where you came from. And King Edward deserves to know that his daughter still lives. He spent 20 years mourning you, believing you were dead." Eleanor moved to the window, staring out at the winter landscape. From this height, she could see the village of Ashwick spread out below, the place where she had spent her entire life being treated as refuse. She thought about Greta and the other villagers who had tormented her, about Marcus and his cruel companions, about all the years of loneliness and suffering. And then she thought about the king, a man she had never met, who had apparently spent 2 decades searching for her. She thought about the mother she had never known, who had died in part from the grief of losing her. She thought about the family she might have had, the life she might have lived if things had been different. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "What if I go to the king and he's disappointed? What if I'm not what he hoped for? I'm not a princess, William. I don't know how to be one. I can barely read. I've never learned courtly manners. I don't know anything about ruling or politics or any of the things a princess should know. William came to stand beside her at the window. King Edward isn't looking for a perfect princess. He's looking for his daughter, the child he lost, now grown into a woman. Everything else can be learned, Eleanor. What matters is that you're alive, that you're safe, that he has the chance to know you. Eleanor turned to look at him, studying his strong profile. "Why you?" she asked suddenly. "Why are you the one who found me? Were you searching for me specifically?" William was silent for a long moment, his jaw tightening. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "The king has sent many people to search for his daughter over the years. Most have given up or returned with nothing. But I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I had my own reasons for wanting to find you. Personal reasons." "What reasons?" Eleanor pressed, sensing there was more to this story than he was telling her. William turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes took her breath away. "My father was captain of the King's Guard 20 years ago. He was responsible for protecting the royal family. When you were taken, it happened on his watch. He spent the rest of his life trying to find you, to make amends for his failure. When he died 3 years ago, he made me promise to continue the search. Finding you, bringing you home safely, it's not just about serving the king. It's about honoring my father's memory, about finally giving him the peace he never found in life." Eleanor felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. She reached out without thinking, placing her hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry. That's a heavy burden to carry." William covered her hand with his own, and Eleanor felt heat spread from the point of contact through her entire body. "It was a burden," he said softly. "But now, looking at you, knowing that I've finally found you after all these years, it feels more like a gift. You're alive, Eleanor. Against all odds, you survived. That means something." They stood there for a moment, hands touching, eyes locked, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. It was more than gratitude, more than the bond between a rescuer and the rescued. It was something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. William released her hand and stepped back, his expression becoming guarded. "Enter," he called out. The door opened to reveal one of Lord Godwin's servants, a nervous-looking young man who kept his eyes carefully averted from Eleanor. "Sir William, Lord Godwin requests your presence in the Great Hall. He says it's a matter of some urgency." William nodded. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." After the servant left, he turned back to Eleanor. "I need to attend to this. We'll continue this conversation later. In the meantime, I want you to think about what I've told you. Think about whether you're ready to meet your father, to claim your birthright." After William left, Eleanor sank down onto a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, each more overwhelming than the last. She was a princess, the king's lost daughter. Everything she had believed about herself, about her place in the world, had been a lie. But was it really a lie? She had lived her entire life as a peasant. That was the reality she knew, the only reality that felt real to her. Could she really just step into a different life, a different identity, as if the past 20 years had never happened? And what about William? She couldn't deny the feelings that had begun to grow in her heart, feelings that were completely inappropriate for someone of her station, or rather, her former station. If she was truly a princess, then William was no longer impossibly above her. They would be of similar rank, moving in the same social circles. The thought was dizzying, but beneath all the confusion and fear, there was something else, a tiny spark of hope, of possibility. For the first time in her life, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve endless drudgery and humiliation, a future where she was valued, where she belonged, where she might even be loved. The door opened again, and Eleanor looked up, expecting to see William. Instead, she found herself facing Lady Beatrice, Lord Godwin's wife, a severe woman with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. "So," Lady Beatrice said, her voice dripping with disdain, "the kitchen girl has managed to worm her way into Sir William's favor. How predictable. I suppose you think yourself very clever, using your looks to secure a better position." Eleanor stood quickly, her face flushing. "My lady, it's not like that." "Sir William requested my service because you're young and pretty, and men are fools," Lady Beatrice interrupted. "Don't play innocent with me, girl. I know exactly what you are and what you're doing. But let me make one thing very clear. Sir William will leave here soon, and when he does, you'll go back to being what you've always been. Nothing. No one. A foundling with delusions of grandeur. The words struck deep, awakening all of Eleanor's insecurities and fears. What if Lady Beatrice was right? What if William's interest in her was just temporary, born of curiosity or pity? What if the whole story about being the king's daughter was a mistake, or worse, some kind of cruel joke? But before Eleanor could respond, William's voice came from the doorway. Lady Beatrice, I'll thank you not to speak to my servant in such a manner. Eleanor is under my protection, and any disrespect shown to her is disrespect shown to me. Lady Beatrice's face went white, then red. Sir William, I meant no offense. You were merely leaving, William said coldly, and you will not trouble Eleanor again. Is that understood? Lady Beatrice fled, leaving Eleanor and William alone once more. Eleanor found herself trembling, the confrontation having shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Are you all right? William asked, his voice gentle again. Eleanor nodded, though it was a lie. What did Lord Godwin want? William's expression darkened. He's received word that there are bandits on the roads leading to the capital. The messenger I sent to inform the king of your discovery may have been intercepted. We can't be certain, but we need to proceed with caution. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, William said carefully, that if someone knows I've found you, they may try to prevent you from reaching the king. Whoever took you 20 years ago may still have allies, people who don't want the lost princess to be found. Then maybe I shouldn't go, Eleanor said quickly. Maybe it's safer if I just stay here, if we forget this whole thing. William crossed to her and took her hands in his. Eleanor, running away won't keep you safe. Now that the possibility of your identity is known, you're in danger whether you go to the king or not. The only way to truly protect you is to get you to the capital, to your father, where you'll be under the full protection of the crown. Eleanor felt fear coiling in her stomach like a snake. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn, William said. I've already arranged for horses and supplies. We'll travel fast and light, avoiding the main roads where possible. I'll have a contingent of my most trusted men with us, soldiers who have served with me for years and whose loyalty is beyond question. Tomorrow, Eleanor repeated numbly. Everything was happening so fast, too fast for her to fully process. Just yesterday, she had been a simple peasant girl, worried about nothing more than surviving another day. Now she was apparently a princess, about to embark on a dangerous journey to meet a father she had never known. William seemed to sense her turmoil. He pulled her closer, and Eleanor found herself wrapped in his strong arms, her face pressed against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and reassuring, and smell the scent of leather and steel that clung to him. I won't let anything happen to you, he murmured into her hair. I swear it on my father's memory, on my own life. I will get you to the king safely, no matter what it takes. Eleanor pulled back slightly to look up at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. It was more than duty, more than honor, or the desire to fulfill a promise to his dead father. There was something deeper there, something personal and intense that made her heart race. William, she whispered, hardly daring to speak the words forming in her mind. Why are you really doing this? The truth. William's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gently brushing across her cheek. Because, he said, his voice rough with emotion, from the moment I saw you in that great hall, stumbling with your armload of firewood, something in my chest shifted. And when I found you in the forest, terrified and alone but still fighting, still refusing to give up, I knew that finding you was about more than duty or honor or keeping a promise to my father. What was it about? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. It was about finding the other half of my soul, William said simply. I know it sounds like madness. I know we barely know each other. But I've spent years searching for you, thinking about you, wondering what kind of woman the lost princess might have become. And now that I've found you, now that I know you, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm not a princess, William. I'm just Eleanor, a girl who doesn't know which fork to use at dinner, who can't dance or play music or do any of the things a woman of noble birth should know. What if you're disappointed when you see me in that world? William leaned down, and for a moment, Eleanor thought he was going to kiss her. But instead, He rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "You could never disappoint me, Eleanor. You're brave and strong and kind, despite everything life has thrown at you. Those qualities matter far more than knowing which fork to use." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, two people from different worlds who had somehow found each other against all odds. Eleanor knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, that claiming her birthright would come with challenges she couldn't even imagine. But with William beside her, she felt like she might actually be able to face them. The night before their departure, Eleanor found sleep impossible. She lay in the small servants' quarters that William had arranged for her within the manor, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced with thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. She kept thinking about William's warning, about the bandits on the road, about the unknown enemies who might want to prevent her from reaching the king. When the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the small window, Eleanor rose and dressed in the clothes William had provided for her. They were simple but well-made, sturdy traveling garments in dark wool with a heavy cloak lined with fur. As she fastened the cloak around her shoulders, she caught sight of herself in the small polished metal mirror on the wall and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was the ragged peasant girl in threadbare clothes. In her place stood someone who looked almost noble, someone who might actually belong in the world she was about to enter. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. A soft knock at the door made her heart leap. "Eleanor, it's time." William's voice came from the other side. She opened the door to find him dressed for travel, wearing a leather jerkin over a thick tunic, with his sword belted at his side and a heavy cloak thrown over his broad shoulders. Behind him stood 5 other men, all armed and alert, their eyes constantly scanning the corridors for threats. "These are my most trusted soldiers," William said, gesturing to the men. "They've served with me for years, and they know the truth about who you are. They'll give their lives to protect you if necessary." Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the gravity of it all. "I hope that won't be necessary," she said quietly. William's expression was serious. "So do I. But we must be prepared for anything." He held out his hand to her. "Are you ready?" Eleanor took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "As ready as I'll ever be." They made their way through the manor in silence, avoiding the main corridors where Lord Godwin and his family might see them. William had made arrangements to leave before the Lord was awake, wanting to avoid any potential complications or delays. As they stepped out into the cold morning air, Eleanor saw 7 horses waiting, including a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "She's yours," William said, helping Eleanor mount. "Her name is Dove, and she has the sweetest temperament of any horse I've ever known. She'll take good care of you." Eleanor settled into the saddle, grateful that old Martha had taught her to ride years ago, insisting that it was a useful skill even for a peasant girl. The knowledge had come from Martha's own mysterious past, another question that would now never be answered. They set out as the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the frost-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. William led the group, with Eleanor riding beside him and the 5 soldiers forming a protective circle around them. They avoided the main road, instead following smaller paths that wound through forests and across fields. For the first few hours they rode in relative silence, everyone alert for signs of danger. Eleanor found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at every snapping branch or bird call. William noticed her nervousness and moved his horse closer to hers. "Try to relax," he said softly. "Tension will only tire you faster, and we have a long journey ahead. Talk to me. Tell me about your life in Ashwick, about the woman who raised you." Eleanor appreciated the distraction. As they rode, she began to talk, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. She told him about old Martha, about the small kindnesses the old woman had shown her, the skills she had taught, the stories she had told on cold winter nights. She talked about the loneliness of her life after Martha died, about the daily humiliations from the villagers, about the small moments of beauty she had found in the world despite everything. William listened intently, his expression growing darker as she described the cruelty she had endured. "You shouldn't have had to live like that," he said when she finished. "You're the daughter of a king, Eleanor. You should have been raised in comfort and safety, surrounded by people who loved and cherished you. But then I wouldn't be who I am," Eleanor pointed out. "The hardships shaped me, made me stronger. I'm not sure I would trade that, even knowing what I know now." William looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. You're remarkable, do you know that? Most people in your situation would be consumed by bitterness and resentment, but you've somehow managed to hold on to your kindness, your compassion. Before Eleanor could respond, one of the soldiers rode up beside them, his expression tense. Sir William, I think we're being followed. 3 riders, maybe 4, keeping their distance but matching our pace. William's entire demeanor changed instantly. His hand moved to his sword, and his eyes scanned the tree line behind them. How long have they been following us? At least an hour, sir. They picked us up shortly after we crossed the river. William cursed under his breath. All right. We'll continue as planned, but everyone stays alert. If they make a move, protect Eleanor at all costs. Get her to safety, even if it means leaving me behind. No, Eleanor said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I won't leave you. William turned to look at her, and despite the tension of the situation, there was warmth in his eyes. Eleanor, I mean it, she interrupted. You've protected me, stood up for me, risked everything to help me. I won't abandon you now, no matter what happens. Before William could argue, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder behind them. The riders who had been following were no longer trying to hide their presence. They were closing in fast. Ride! William shouted, spurring his horse forward. Make for the forest ahead. They galloped across the open field, the cold wind stinging Eleanor's face as Dove stretched out beneath her, running with surprising speed. Behind them she could hear their pursuers gaining ground, their shouts carrying across the winter landscape. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping at their faces and cloaks. The dense trees forced them to slow down, to navigate carefully through the undergrowth. Eleanor could hear the other riders still behind them, could hear William shouting orders to his men. Suddenly, an arrow whistled past Eleanor's head, so close she felt the wind of its passage. Her heart leaped into her throat as William pulled his horse alongside hers, using his own body as a shield. There, one of the soldiers shouted, pointing ahead to where the trees thinned. The old ruins! We can make a stand there! They burst out of the forest into a clearing dominated by the crumbling remains of what had once been a small fortress. The stone walls were partially collapsed, but they would provide some cover. William practically lifted Eleanor from her horse and pushed her toward the most intact section of wall. Stay down and stay hidden, he ordered, drawing his sword. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe. William, Eleanor began, but he silenced her with a look that was equal parts fierce determination and tender concern. Trust me, he said simply. Then he turned to face the riders who were emerging from the trees. There were 6 of them, all armed, all wearing the colors of a noble house Eleanor didn't recognize. They fanned out in a semicircle, their leader urging his horse forward. He was a hard-faced man with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes as cold as winter ice. Sir William Garrett, the man said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. We have no quarrel with you. Give us the girl, and you and your men can ride away unharmed. William's laugh was cold and humorless. You must think me a fool to make such an offer. We both know that if I give her to you, she'll be dead within the hour, and I swore an oath to protect her with my life. The scarred man shrugged. Then you'll die with her. Your choice. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion for Eleanor, though it must have taken only seconds. The attackers charged, and William and his soldiers met them with a clash of steel that rang through the clearing like thunder. Eleanor watched from her hiding place, her heart in her throat, as William fought with a skill and ferocity that took her breath away. He moved like water, fluid and graceful despite his size and the heavy armor he wore. His sword seemed to be everywhere at once, blocking strikes, countering attacks, driving back opponents who were clearly skilled fighters themselves. 2 of the attackers fell to his blade in the first moments of the fight, their blood staining the frost-covered ground. But the odds were still against them. One of William's soldiers went down with an arrow in his shoulder. Another was overwhelmed by 2 attackers working in tandem. Eleanor could see the strain on William's face as he tried to protect his men, while also keeping himself between the attackers and where she hid. The scarred leader had circled around, Eleanor realized with horror. He was making his way toward her hiding spot, using the chaos of the fight as a distraction. His eyes locked on hers, and she saw triumph flash across his face as he dismounted and drew his sword. There you are, Your Highness, he said mockingly. Time to end this farce once and for all. Eleanor looked around desperately for a weapon, for anything she could use to defend herself. Her hand closed around a piece of broken stone from the ruined wall, and she gripped it tightly, knowing it was pitifully inadequate against a trained swordsman. The scarred man advanced, his sword raised. Eleanor prepared to fight, to at least try to defend herself, when William's voice rang out across the clearing. "Touch her and die!" William had fought his way clear of his opponents and was charging toward them, his face a mask of fury. The scarred man turned to face this new threat, bringing his sword up just in time to block William's devastating strike. The force of the blow drove him back several steps, and Eleanor could see the shock on his face at William's strength. The two men fought with savage intensity, their blades moving so fast Eleanor could barely follow them. William was the superior swordsman, that much was clear, but the scarred man fought with the desperation of someone who knew defeat meant death. Around them, the battle continued to rage, the sound of steel on steel mixing with shouts and cries of pain. Then Eleanor saw it. One of the attackers, having dispatched one of William's soldiers, was raising a crossbow, aiming directly at William's unprotected back. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor realized what was about to happen, realized that William was so focused on the scarred man in front of him that he didn't see the danger behind. She didn't think. She simply acted, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed. Eleanor grabbed a fist-sized stone and hurled it with all her strength at the crossbowman. The stone flew true, striking him in the temple just as he pulled the trigger. The bolt went wide, missing William by inches, and the crossbowman fell from his horse, unconscious or dead. William heard the crossbow fire and spun, seeing the fallen attacker and Eleanor standing exposed, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with defiance. His momentary distraction was all the scarred man needed. He lunged forward, his blade aimed at William's heart, but William was faster. He twisted away from the strike and brought his sword around in a devastating arc that caught the scarred man across the chest. The attacker fell, his sword clattering from his nerveless fingers, his eyes wide with shock as he realized he was dying. "Who sent you?" William demanded, kneeling beside the fallen man. "Who wants her dead?" The scarred man's laugh was wet with blood. "You're too late, Knight. Even if you get her to the capital, there are others. This isn't over. The lost princess will never sit on her throne. We've made certain of that." "Who?" William insisted, gripping the man's tunic. "Give me a name." But the scarred man's eyes had already glazed over, whatever secrets he held dying with him. William let the body fall and turned to survey the clearing. Of the 6 attackers, all were dead or dying. Of his own men, 2 were wounded but alive. 1 was dead, and 2 were unharmed, but exhausted. Eleanor ran to William, her hands reaching for him, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt? I saw that blade come so close." "I'm fine," William assured her, though she could see blood seeping through his tunic from a cut on his side. "Thanks to you. That was either very brave or very foolish, what you did." "It was necessary," Eleanor said firmly. "You would have done the same for me." William pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly despite the blood and the chaos around them. "You saved my life," he murmured into her hair. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You owe me nothing," Eleanor whispered back. "We protect each other. That's what people do when they—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, unable to voice the feelings that had been growing in her heart. William pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "When they what, Eleanor?" Eleanor took a shaky breath, knowing that what she was about to say could change everything between them. "When they love each other," she finished quietly. The world seemed to stop. William's eyes searched hers, and what she saw there made her heart soar. Without another word, he lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss filled with passion and promise, with the desperation of having nearly lost each other and the joy of being alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, Eleanor. I think I have from the moment I saw you, though I didn't understand it then. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." The aftermath of the battle left them shaken but determined. William's wounded men were tended to as best they could manage with the supplies they carried, and they took a brief moment to honor the soldier who had fallen defending Eleanor. His name had been Thomas, William told her quietly, a good man who had served faithfully for 7 years and who left behind a wife and young son in the capital. Eleanor felt the weight of that loss settle heavily on her shoulders. A man had died protecting her, a man with a family who would now grieve his absence. The reality of her situation, of what claiming her birthright truly meant, became starkly clear in that moment. This wasn't just about her anymore. People would live and die based on the choices she made, the path she chose to follow. "We need to keep moving," William said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and pain. "There will be more where these came from, and we're in no condition to face another attack. The capital is still 2 days' ride from here, if we push hard." They gathered what supplies they could from the fallen attackers' horses and set out once more, this time moving with even greater urgency. William rode close to Eleanor, one hand pressed against the wound in his side that he insisted was minor, despite the blood that continued to seep through the makeshift bandage. As they traveled through the afternoon, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about what the scarred man had said before he died. There were others. The conspiracy against her ran deeper than just these 6 attackers. Someone with power and resources wanted to ensure she never reached her father, never claimed her place as the king's daughter. "William," she said quietly, guiding Dove closer to his mount, "what if we're riding into a trap? What if there are more enemies waiting for us in the capital?" William's expression was grim. "It's possible, likely even, but the alternative is to run, to hide, to let whoever orchestrated your abduction 20 years ago win. Is that what you want?" Eleanor thought about it. Really thought about it. She could disappear again, take a new name, start a new life somewhere far from England. She could let the lost princess remain lost, could avoid the danger and the responsibility and the weight of expectation that came with her birthright. But she thought about King Edward, her father, a man who had spent 20 years searching for her, mourning her. She thought about Queen Anne, her mother, who had died with a broken heart, never knowing what had become of her youngest daughter. She thought about all the people who had suffered because of her disappearance, about the instability it had caused in the kingdom, and she thought about William, about the promise he had made to his dying father, about the years he had spent searching for her. She thought about the way he looked at her, the way he had fought for her, the way he had kissed her in that ruined fortress with death all around them. "No," she said firmly. "I won't run. I won't hide. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting other people dictate my life. If I'm truly the king's daughter, then I have a responsibility to him, to the kingdom, and I won't shirk that responsibility just because it's dangerous." William's expression softened, and despite his pain, he reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "You're going to make a remarkable princess, Eleanor. Your father will be so proud of you." They rode on as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the winter sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. William led them to a small, abandoned shepherd's hut he remembered from previous travels, a place where they could rest for a few hours while some of his men stood watch. Inside the hut, Eleanor helped William remove his blood-soaked tunic so she could properly tend to his wound. The cut was deeper than he had let on, a long slash across his ribs that would definitely leave a scar. As she cleaned it with water from their supplies and bound it with fresh cloth, she was acutely aware of his eyes on her, of the intimacy of the moment. "You're good at this," William said, his voice tight with pain as she worked. "Did Martha teach you?" "She taught me many things," Eleanor replied, her hands steady despite her nervousness. "She said a woman should know how to tend wounds, birth babies, and prepare the dead for burial. The fundamentals of life, she called them." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." Eleanor smiled sadly. "She was. I wish I had known to ask her more questions when I had the chance, about where she found me, about the cloth I was wrapped in, about whether she ever suspected the truth of my origins." William winced as she pulled the bandage tight, but his hand came up to cover hers. "Perhaps she knew more than she said. Perhaps she was protecting you the only way she knew how, by keeping you hidden, keeping you safe." "Maybe," Eleanor agreed, "but now I'll never know for certain." She finished with the bandage and sat back, studying her work. "That should hold until we can get you to a proper physician in the capital." "Thank you," William said softly. Then, before Eleanor could move away, he pulled her closer, his hands cupping her face. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. When we reach the capital, when you're presented to the king, everything will change. You'll be surrounded by courtiers and nobles, by people who want to use you for their own purposes. There will be pressure on you to make political marriages, to form alliances. Your life won't be your own anymore." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "Are you saying that what's between us, whatever this is, can't continue?" "I'm saying that it will be more complicated," William replied. I'm a knight, Eleanor, but I'm not of royal blood. Some will argue that you deserve better, that a princess should marry a prince or a great lord. There will be opposition to any relationship between us." Eleanor felt anger flare inside her. "So after everything we've been through, after you told me you loved me, you're going to let other people dictate our future?" "No," William said firmly, pulling her even closer. "I'm telling you that there will be obstacles, that this won't be easy. But I'm also telling you that I don't care what anyone says. I love you, Eleanor. I've loved you since before I even knew who you were. And I'll fight for you, for us, with every breath in my body. Then that's all I need to know," Eleanor whispered, and kissed him, pouring all of her fear and hope and love into that kiss. William responded with equal passion, his arms wrapping around her, holding her as if he would never let her go. They pulled apart when one of the soldiers discreetly cleared his throat from the doorway. "Sir William, we should move on. The horses are rested, and we'll make better time traveling at night when we're less visible." Reluctantly, William released Eleanor and stood, moving more stiffly than he had earlier. The wound was clearly bothering him more than he wanted to admit, but Eleanor knew better than to suggest he stay behind to rest. Nothing short of death would keep William from seeing her safely to the capital. They rode through the night, the temperature dropping steadily as the hours passed. Eleanor found herself nodding off in the saddle more than once, only to jerk awake when Dove shifted beneath her. William rode beside her, his presence a constant comfort, even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both. As dawn broke on their second day of travel, they crested a hill, and Eleanor saw it in the distance. The capital city, its walls rising high and imposing against the morning sky, its towers and spires catching the first rays of sunlight. It was the largest city Eleanor had ever seen, a sprawling mass of buildings and people that seemed to stretch on forever. "That's where your father waits," William said softly. "That's your home, Eleanor. Your true home." Eleanor stared at the city, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror. Somewhere in that vast expanse of stone and humanity was her father, the king, a man she had never met but who had shaped her entire existence through his loss of her. Soon she would stand before him, would look into his eyes and see if he recognized anything of the daughter he had lost 20 years ago. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "What if he doesn't believe I'm his daughter? What if he thinks I'm an imposter trying to claim what isn't mine?" William reached across and took her hand. "He'll believe it. One look at you, and he'll know the truth. You have your mother's eyes, her hair, her features, and you have the birthmark. The evidence is undeniable." They continued their approach to the city, and as they drew closer, Eleanor could see the massive gates standing open, guards in the king's colors stationed on either side. William pulled his horse to a halt and turned to his men. "When we enter the city, we go straight to the castle. No stops, no delays. Stay alert for any signs of trouble. Whoever sent those assassins may have people waiting for us inside the walls." The men nodded, forming their protective circle around Eleanor once more. As they passed through the gates, Eleanor was overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of city life. Merchants hawked their wares, children ran through the streets, and everywhere she looked there were people, more people than she had ever seen in one place. They made their way through the winding streets toward the castle that dominated the center of the city. It was enormous, a fortress of gray stone with towers that seemed to touch the clouds. As they approached the castle gates, the guards there recognized William and immediately snapped to attention. "Sir William, we weren't expecting you back so soon. Does the king know you've returned? Send word to His Majesty that I've arrived with news of great importance," William commanded. "Tell him I found what he's been searching for these past 20 years. The guard's eyes widened, flicking to Eleanor with sudden understanding and shock. "At once, sir." They were escorted through the castle gates into a vast courtyard where servants rushed forward to take their horses. Eleanor dismounted on shaking legs, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and nerves. William was immediately at her side, his hand steady on her elbow. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "No, but I don't think I ever will be, so we might as well proceed." William smiled, though she could see the strain of his own exhaustion and pain in his eyes. "That's the spirit. Come, let's go meet your father." They were led through the castle by a nervous steward, through corridors hung with rich tapestries and past rooms filled with treasures Eleanor couldn't even begin to comprehend. Everything was so vast, so magnificent, so completely foreign to the simple life she had known. She felt small and insignificant, a peasant girl playing dress-up in a world where she didn't belong. Finally, they reached a set of massive oak doors guarded by 2 knights in ceremonial armor. The steward spoke quietly to the guards, who exchanged glances before one of them pushed open the doors. "Sir William Garrett and guest, Your Majesty," the guard announced. Eleanor's first glimpse of the throne room took her breath away. It was enormous, with vaulted ceilings that seemed impossibly high and windows that let in streams of colored light through stained glass. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne of carved stone and precious metals, was a man who could only be King Edward. He was in his middle years, with threads of silver running through his dark hair and lines of care etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. But despite the marks of age and worry, there was still strength in his bearing, still power in the way he held himself. As they approached, walking the length of that vast room, the king's eyes were fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her want to flee. William went to one knee when they reached the base of the dais, and Eleanor quickly followed suit, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Your Majesty," William said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "I have fulfilled the oath I made to my father and to you. I have found your daughter, the lost Princess Eleanor, and brought her home safely." King Edward slowly rose from his throne and descended the steps of the dais, his movements careful and deliberate. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered, not daring to look up until the king spoke. "Rise," King Edward commanded, his voice deeper and rougher than Eleanor had expected. "Both of you, rise and let me see her face." Eleanor stood on trembling legs, finally raising her eyes to meet those of the king. For a long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other, and Eleanor watched as recognition and disbelief and hope and grief chased each other across the king's weathered features. "Anne," the king whispered, his voice breaking, "you look just like your mother, just like my Anne." King Edward's hand trembled as he reached out to touch Eleanor's face, his fingers gently tracing her features as if trying to confirm that she was real, that she was truly standing before him. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, and Eleanor felt her own eyes filling as she looked at this man who was her father, this stranger who had searched for her for 20 years. "I never gave up hope," the king said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone told me you were dead, that I should accept it and move on. But a father knows, deep in his soul, when his child still lives. I could feel it all these years. I could feel that you were out there somewhere, waiting to be found." "Your Majesty," Eleanor whispered, unsure what to call him, unsure how to navigate this impossible moment. I'm sorry I was taken from you. Sorry for all the years you spent searching. Sorry for the pain my absence caused." King Edward pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as his body shook with sobs. "You have nothing to apologize for, my daughter. Nothing. You were an innocent child, a victim of someone's treachery. The fault lies with whoever took you from us, not with you." Eleanor clung to her father, feeling 20 years of loneliness and longing begin to crack open inside her chest. She had lived her entire life believing she was alone in the world, unwanted and unloved. But here was proof that she had been wanted, desperately, that her absence had left a hole in someone's heart that could never be filled. When they finally pulled apart, King Edward turned to William, who had been standing quietly to the side, his hand pressed against his wounded side. "Sir William, you have done what no one else could. You've brought my daughter home. I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." William bowed deeply, though the movement clearly pained him. "I was merely fulfilling the promise I made to my father, Your Majesty. He spent his life searching for the princess, and it was my honor to complete his mission." King Edward's eyes narrowed as he noticed the blood seeping through William's tunic. "You're wounded. What happened?" "We were attacked on the road," William explained. 6 men, well-armed and clearly sent to prevent us from reaching the capital. We fought them off, but we lost 1 good man in the process, and several others were wounded." The king's expression darkened with rage. "Someone knew you were bringing her here. Someone wanted to stop you." He turned to one of the guards standing nearby. "Summon Lord Chancellor Pemberton and the captain of the guard immediately. We need to root out this conspiracy before they can make another attempt on my daughter's life." Over the next hour, Eleanor found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The king's physician was called to examine her and confirm the birthmark on her shoulder. which he did with growing excitement and wonder. William's wounds were also tended to, though he protested that the princess should receive all the attention. Eleanor refused to leave his side during the treatment, much to the raised eyebrows of the court officials who had gathered. Lord Chancellor Pemberton arrived, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a calculating expression. He listened to William's account of the attack with growing concern, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he considered the implications. "The conspiracy clearly runs deeper than we suspected, Your Majesty," Pemberton said carefully. "These weren't simple bandits. They were well-trained fighters with specific orders to prevent the princess from reaching the capital. That suggests someone with significant resources and inside knowledge of Sir William's mission." King Edward paced the room like a caged lion, his earlier tears replaced by cold fury. "I want every person who knew about William's search investigated. I want to know who leaked the information, who hired those assassins, and who has been working against us all these years." "Your Majesty," William interjected, "before the leader of the attackers died, he said something that troubles me." "He said that even if we reached the capital, there were others, that the princess would never sit on her throne. He seemed very confident that the conspiracy would succeed." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine at the memory of those words. She had been so focused on reaching her father, on claiming her identity, that she hadn't fully considered what might come after. But now, standing in the throne room surrounded by guards and officials, she realized that her troubles were far from over. "We need to consider who would benefit from Eleanor's death," Pemberton said thoughtfully. "When she disappeared 20 years ago, the line of succession shifted. Your eldest son, Prince Edmund, became your sole heir." King Edward shook his head firmly. "Edmund would never harm his own sister. He's been desperate to find her, almost as desperate as I've been." "I'm not suggesting Prince Edmund is involved," Pemberton clarified. "But there are others in the court who have aligned themselves with him, who have built their power and influence on the assumption that he would be the only heir. Eleanor's return threatens those arrangements." Eleanor listened to this discussion with growing unease. She hadn't even considered that she might have a brother, or that her existence might threaten his position. "Where is Prince Edmund?" she asked quietly. "Shouldn't he be here?" King Edward's expression softened. "Edmund is commanding our forces on the northern border, dealing with raiders who have been troubling that region. I sent word to him weeks ago when William first reported that he might have found you, but the message may not have reached him yet. He should be here within a few days." The doors to the throne room burst open, and a woman swept in, her movements graceful despite her obvious haste. She was perhaps 40 years old, beautiful in a cold, aristocratic way, with pale blonde hair and ice-blue eyes. Her dress was magnificent, layers of deep green velvet trimmed with fur and embroidered with golden thread. Eleanor instinctively disliked her, though she couldn't have said why. "Your Majesty," the woman said, curtsying elegantly, "I heard the most extraordinary rumor. They say that Sir William has returned with someone claiming to be the lost princess." King Edward's expression grew guarded. "Lady Cordelia, yes, the rumors are true. My daughter has been found and brought home safely." Lady Cordelia's eyes fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made Eleanor want to step back. There was calculation in that gaze, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "How wonderful," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "And you're certain she's legitimate? Not some impostor trying to take advantage of your desperation?" "She bears the birthmark," King Edward said firmly, "and she's the very image of her mother. There's no doubt in my mind that she's my daughter." Lady Cordelia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Your Majesty, forgive my skepticism. It's just that after 20 years, one learns to be cautious about such miraculous discoveries." She turned her attention to Eleanor. "Welcome home, Your Highness. I'm sure we'll become very well acquainted in the days to come." After Lady Cordelia left, Eleanor turned to her father. "Who was that woman?" King Edward's expression was troubled. "Lady Cordelia Ashworth. She's been a fixture of the court for many years, widow of one of my most trusted advisors. She has considerable influence among the nobility, and she's been a strong supporter of Edmund." He paused, then added quietly, "She's also been pressuring me to arrange a marriage between Edmund and her daughter, which would significantly increase her family's power." Eleanor understood immediately. Lady Cordelia's position, her daughter's future, all of it depended on Edmund being the sole heir. Eleanor's return threatened all of that, which made Lady Cordelia a potential enemy. Over the next few days, Eleanor was introduced to the overwhelming complexity of court life. She was given magnificent chambers in the royal wing of the castle, with servants to attend to her every need. Seamstresses arrived to create a wardrobe befitting a princess, though Eleanor felt uncomfortable in the elaborate gowns they produced. Tutors were engaged to teach her etiquette, history, politics, and all the things a princess should know. Through it all, William remained close by, though protocol demanded he maintain a certain distance now that Eleanor's true identity was known. They saw each other in brief moments, stolen glances across crowded rooms, quick conversations in corridors when no one else was around. Eleanor could feel the frustration building between them, the desire to be together warring with the demands of her new position. One evening, as Eleanor was preparing for bed, her maidservant informed her that Sir William had requested an audience. Eleanor's heart leaped, and she quickly dismissed the servants, wanting privacy for whatever William had to say. He arrived a few minutes later, looking tired but determined. The wound in his side had healed well, though he still moved more carefully than usual. Eleanor rushed to him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. "I've missed you," she whispered into his chest. "These past few days, being so close but not able to really talk to you, it's been torture." "I know," William murmured, his lips against her hair. "But we need to be careful, Eleanor. There are eyes everywhere in this castle, and people who would use our relationship against us." Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "I don't care what they think. I love you, William. That hasn't changed just because I'm a princess now. But everything else has changed," William said gently. "You're the king's daughter, Eleanor. There will be expectations, pressure to make a political marriage that will benefit the kingdom. And I'm just a knight, with no lands or title beyond what I've earned through service." "You're the man who saved my life," Eleanor said fiercely. "The man who spent years searching for me, who fought for me, who protected me. That matters more than any title or land." William cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes intense. "I spoke to your father today. I asked for his permission to court you properly, to pursue a relationship with you with the intention of marriage." Eleanor's breath caught. "What did he say?" "He said that the decision is ultimately yours to make," William replied. "But he also warned me that there will be opposition from the nobles, that many will argue you should marry someone of higher rank, someone who can bring political alliances or wealth to the crown." "I don't want political alliances," Eleanor said. "I want you." William kissed her then, deeply and passionately, pouring all of his love and longing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Then we'll face whatever opposition comes together," William said firmly. "I won't give you up, Eleanor. Not after everything we've been through to find each other." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion outside Eleanor's chambers. Voices were raised in alarm, and there was the sound of running footsteps. William immediately stepped in front of Eleanor, his hand moving to his sword. The door burst open, and one of the king's guards rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Your Highness, Sir William, there's been an attack on the king's chambers. Someone tried to assassinate His Majesty." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "Is he all right? Is my father alive?" "Yes, but barely. The assassin was caught, and the king wants to see you both immediately." They rushed through the corridors to the king's chambers, where chaos reigned. Guards were everywhere, and Eleanor could see blood on the floor, though she couldn't tell if it was her father's or the assassin's. King Edward was sitting on his bed, a bandage wrapped around his arm, his face pale but his eyes alert. "Father!" Eleanor cried, rushing to his side. "Are you hurt badly?" "Just a scratch," the king assured her, though the amount of blood suggested otherwise. "The assassin came through the window, would have succeeded if my personal guard hadn't been alert. We've captured him alive, which may finally give us the answers we've been seeking." The assassin was brought in, a wiry man with cold eyes and a defiant expression. He was bound and held between two guards, but he showed no fear, only a smirking confidence that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Who sent you?" King Edward demanded. "Who wants me dead?" The assassin laughed. "You're asking the wrong question, old man. It's not about who wants you dead. It's about who wants your bastard daughter to never claim what isn't rightfully hers." Eleanor felt William tense beside her, but King Edward merely leaned forward, his eyes hard as steel. "My daughter is no bastard. She's the legitimate heir, and she has every right to her place in this family and this kingdom." Does she? The assassin challenged. A girl raised as a peasant who knows nothing of ruling or politics or the responsibilities of power. The kingdom deserves better than a foundling playing at princess. Enough, William said coldly. Answer the king's question. Who hired you? The assassin's smirk widened. Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. The wheels are already in motion. The princess will never be safe, not as long as she threatens the natural order of things. There are too many with too much to lose. King Edward nodded to Lord Chancellor Pemberton, who had been standing quietly to the side. Take him to the dungeons. Use whatever methods necessary to get the truth from him. I want names, I want proof, and I want it before the sun rises. As the assassin was dragged away, still laughing, Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. This will never end, will it? She said quietly. As long as I'm alive, there will be people trying to kill me, trying to eliminate the threat I represent. King Edward moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. Eleanor, listen to me. I won't lie to you and say that your life will be easy or safe. There are people who fear what your return means, who have built their power on the assumption that you were dead. But you are my daughter. You are the rightful princess, and I will move heaven and earth to protect you. But at what cost? Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face. People are dying because of me. Your life is in danger because of me. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared again, if I went somewhere far away where no one knows who I am. No, William said firmly, dropping to his knees beside the king. That's exactly what they want, Eleanor. They want you to be afraid, to run, to give up your claim. But you're stronger than that. You've survived 20 years of hardship and cruelty. You can survive this too. King Edward squeezed her hands. He's right, my daughter. And you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have William. You have people who love you and will fight for you. Together, we'll root out this conspiracy and make you safe. The next morning brought news that shook the entire castle. Under interrogation, the assassin had finally broken and revealed the names of his co-conspirators. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had imagined, involving several high-ranking nobles who had been working together to ensure Eleanor never claimed her birthright. And at the center of it all was Lady Cordelia Ashworth. She was arrested along with 3 other lords, all of whom had benefited greatly from Edmund's position as sole heir. The evidence was overwhelming, documents and correspondence that detailed their plans, payments made to assassins, arrangements for Eleanor's abduction 20 years ago. Eleanor watched from a balcony as Lady Cordelia was led away in chains, the woman's elegant facade finally cracking to reveal the desperate fury beneath. As their eyes met across the courtyard, Lady Cordelia shouted up at her, "You don't belong here. You're a peasant, a nobody. The kingdom will never accept you as their princess." But Eleanor stood tall, her chin held high, refusing to let the woman's words touch her. She wasn't that frightened girl in the forest anymore. She wasn't the humiliated servant being mocked in the village. She was Princess Eleanor, daughter of King Edward, and she would not be intimidated or driven away by those who sought to harm her. The day of Lady Cordelia's trial, Prince Edmund finally arrived at the capital. Eleanor's brother was a tall, handsome man of 25, with their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. He had ridden hard from the northern border, desperate to meet the sister he had never known. When he entered the throne room and saw Eleanor standing beside their father, he stopped dead in his tracks, staring at her with wonder and disbelief. Then, to everyone's surprise, he strode forward and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Sister," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I've waited my whole life to say that word. Welcome home." Eleanor hugged him back, feeling a connection she hadn't expected. This was her brother, her blood, the family she had always longed for. "I'm so sorry if my return has caused problems for you," she said quietly. "I never meant to threaten your position." Edmund pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, his expression fierce. "Threaten my position? Eleanor, you've given me the greatest gift imaginable. I have a sister. I'm not alone anymore. Do you know what it's been like being the only child carrying the weight of the entire kingdom's expectations by myself? Your return means I have family, someone who understands what it's like to be a part of this strange, complicated life." Over the following weeks, Edmund proved to be Eleanor's staunchest ally. He helped her navigate the complexities of court life, defended her against those nobles who still questioned her legitimacy, and welcomed her into the family with open arms. He also, much to Eleanor's embarrassment and delight, strongly supported her relationship with William. "He's a good man," Edmund told her one afternoon as they walked in the castle gardens. "Honorable, brave, loyal, those qualities matter far more than birth or title. If you love him and he loves you, then that's all that should matter." "Not everyone agrees with you," Eleanor said, thinking of the whispers she heard from certain courtiers, the disapproving looks when she and William were seen together. "Not everyone's opinion matters," Edmund replied firmly. "You're a princess, Eleanor. That means you have power, influence, the ability to choose your own path. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to live your life according to their expectations." 3 months after Eleanor's arrival at the capital, King Edward made a formal announcement. Lady Cordelia and her co-conspirators had been found guilty of high treason and would spend the rest of their lives imprisoned. The conspiracy against Princess Eleanor had been broken, the kingdom's security restored, and in celebration of his daughter's return, the king was planning a grand ceremony where Eleanor would be formally recognized as a princess of the realm, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. The night before the ceremony, Eleanor stood on her balcony, looking out over the city that had become her home. So much had changed in such a short time. She was no longer the frightened peasant girl who had scrubbed floors and endured daily humiliation. She was Princess Eleanor, daughter of the king, sister to the crown prince, and beloved of one of the kingdom's finest knights. Having second thoughts, William's voice came from behind her. He had climbed up to her balcony, a feat that should have been impossible but which he had somehow managed with his usual skill and determination. Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "Only about letting you climb up here. If you fall and break your neck, my father will be very displeased." William pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor melted into his embrace, feeling safe and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. "I had to see you," he said softly. "Tomorrow everything becomes official. You'll be recognized as a princess, and there will be even more eyes on us, even more pressure to conform to expectations." "I don't care about the pressure," Eleanor said firmly. "I've made my choice, William. I choose you. I choose us. And no amount of political maneuvering or social pressure will change that." William kissed her, a kiss filled with passion and promise and the certainty of a future together. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his tunic and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, opening the pouch to reveal a ring. It was simple but beautiful, a band of gold set with a single emerald that matched Eleanor's eyes. It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died. I want you to have it, Eleanor. I want you to wear it as a symbol of my love, my commitment, my promise that I will stand by your side no matter what challenges we face." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as William slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, William Garrett. I'll be your wife, your partner, your love for the rest of my days." The formal ceremony the next day was magnificent. Eleanor wore a gown of deep blue velvet trimmed with ermine, her auburn hair crowned with a circlet of gold. She walked down the aisle of the great cathedral on her father's arm, with Edmund walking proudly behind them and William standing among the assembled knights, his eyes never leaving her face. King Edward formally presented her to the assembled nobility and common people who had gathered to witness the occasion. "This is my daughter," he proclaimed, his voice carrying through the vast space. "Princess Eleanor, lost but now found, returned to us by the grace of God and the dedication of faithful servants. She is a true princess of this realm, with all the rights and privileges that entails, and anyone who questions her legitimacy will answer to me." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face as she looked out at the sea of people celebrating her return. These were her people now, her kingdom, her responsibility. After the ceremony, as the celebrations continued into the night, King Edward took Eleanor aside for a private conversation. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about the future, about the kingdom's stability and succession." Eleanor felt her stomach clench with nervousness. "Father, I'm not getting any younger," the king continued. "And while Edmund is a fine heir, I've come to realize that the kingdom would be stronger with both of you involved in governance. I want to make you a duchess in your own right, with lands and responsibilities. I want you to learn how to rule, to participate in the council, to be an active part of the kingdom's leadership." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Father, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. I've only been here a few months. I still have so much to learn." "You'll learn by doing," King Edward said firmly, "and you won't be alone. Edmund will help you, as will your advisors. And William—" He paused, then smiled. "I saw the ring on your finger, Eleanor. William came to me yesterday and formally asked for my permission to marry you. I gave him my blessing." Eleanor threw her arms around her father, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for accepting us, for giving us a chance." "I want you to be happy," King Edward said, holding her close. "I lost too many years with you already. I won't waste the years we have left by forcing you into a life or a marriage you don't want. William is a good man, and he loves you. That's more than most royal marriages can claim." 6 months later, on a beautiful spring day, Princess Eleanor married Sir William Garrett in a ceremony that brought together nobles and commoners alike. She wore a gown of white silk embroidered with roses, and William stood tall and proud in his finest armor, his face shining with love and joy as she walked down the aisle toward him. King Edward performed the ceremony himself, joining the hands of his daughter and the man who had brought her home. "I give you my blessing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "May your love be as enduring as the kingdom, as strong as steel, as pure as gold." As William kissed his bride, the cathedral erupted in cheers. Eleanor felt her heart overflow with happiness as she looked around at the assembled crowd. Edmund stood nearby, grinning proudly. Her father wiped tears from his eyes, and everywhere she looked, she saw faces lit with genuine joy. The girl who had once been considered worthless, who had been humiliated and rejected and left to die in a forest, had found her place in the world. She was a princess, a duchess, a beloved daughter and sister, but most importantly, she was loved, truly and completely loved, by a man who saw her not as a title or a political advantage, but simply as Eleanor, the woman who had captured his heart. As the celebrations continued late into the night, Eleanor stood on a balcony with William, looking out over the city lights. "Can you believe all of this actually happened?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up back in my cottage in Ashwick, and all of this will have been a dream." William kissed the top of her head. "If it is a dream, then we're both dreaming it together, and I never want to wake up." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with love and happiness. "Neither do I. This is my life now, our life, and it's more wonderful than I ever imagined possible." Far below them, the city celebrated the marriage of their princess, the girl who had been lost but was now found, who had been humiliated but was now honored, who had been alone but was now surrounded by family and love. Eleanor's journey from peasant to princess was complete, but her story was just beginning. With William by her side, her father's love supporting her, and her brother's friendship sustaining her, she was ready to face whatever the future held. She had found her home. She had found her family, and most importantly, she had found herself.